Hi everyone, thanks for joining us this afternoon and sorry we're a couple of minutes late. I'm Will Day Brosnan and I work in the school attendance policy team here in the department. Today's session is about the new attendance guidance, but in particular we're focusing on how schools go about setting an effective school attendance policy. I'm joined by my colleague Adam Luke, who's going to be briefly introducing the expectations from the new guidance. But I'm also pleased to welcome Jayne Lowe, and Jayne is one of the department's attendance advisors who are currently working with a number of trusts and local authorities across the country, supporting them to review their current practice and make changes. And Jayne is going to be leading the kind of substance of this session and is going to be reflecting from a kind of practical perspective on what the new guidance means for schools and trusts who are looking to refresh their attendance policies. Just a quick word to say that we'll be taking questions at the end of this session. So please can you submit these as we go along using the bar that you'll be able to see on the right hand side of your screen. We've allocated around 15 minutes at the end for Q&A with Adam and Jayne. And if you can submit questions as we go along, as I say, that would be great, just so that we can sort through them as we go. And also on the subject of questions, if we can keep all questions related to the subject of today's session, that would also be fantastic. A quick note for anyone who hasn't joined any of these training webinar sessions before too. We ran one about 3 weeks ago now, which was an overview of the kind of significant changes in the new guidance and specifically what these key changes mean for schools and trusts. So you should be able to find a link to that recording also in the sidebar. And we've got other sessions planned for the rest of this month focused on specific elements of the guidance. So next Thursday, we'll be running a webinar with Star Academies, who are going to be talking about the new guidance and focusing in particular on effective coding practice and their day-to-day processes for managing attendance across all of their schools. We'll also be sharing the slides after this session for everyone who signed up. And we'd also like to hear your feedback after the webinar has concluded. So if you could please fill in the feedback form at the end, that would be much appreciated. That is everything, I think, from me. So I'm going to briefly hand over to Adam to kick us off.
Thanks very much, Will. Next slide, please. And the next one. Can we go one more?
Are you having trouble seeing the slides on the screen there, Adam?
Yes, it's come up now. Thank you very much. And thanks again to everybody for making the time to be with us this afternoon as we help you to prepare for September, basically. As you'll be aware now, and as Will has said, we publish new guidance at the beginning of May. It doesn't come in force until September, and the point of that time is to allow you to begin to prepare and put the steps in place. And one of those things for many of you will be updating or beginning a new school attendance policy. And so what the guidance sets out 6 clear expectations of all schools, one of which is having a clear school attendance policy. But what we will focus on today is that the guidance sets out very high level under each of what headings should be in and what should be under each of those. I'm going to say a little bit more about what that means in practice, and then Jayne is going to give you some top tips in terms of how you can bring some of that to life, because it isn't about having a document in and of itself. It's about how do you codify and how do you formalise all the types of processes and systems that you've got in place on the one hand, and on the second hand, how you are going to have how you can sort of represent and write up what you are doing to improve attendance in one clear pace so that everybody is available for it. So, as I say, we're focusing on the second bullet on the slide. The rest will be covered in other webinars, and they're all going to be on the YouTube channel, the DFE YouTube channel. So if you are concerned or struggling with any one of these new expectations, you'll be able to go back and look at some of the top tips and best practice examples from others. Next slide, please. Super. So what should the policy basically achieve? The first important point, as I say, is that it must be in place by September. So many of you will already have a written school attendance policy, but by September it needs to include all of the areas that we're going to discuss today. For some of you, that might be updating and changing bits. For others, it might be thinking about a complete redraft or a restructure of what you've got. And that should be policy should be applied consistently and fairly to all pupils in school, but I must also stress that in applying that and thinking about it in both the development and the application of it, please think about how you are considering individual needs. We know the expectation of attendance should be the same and our ambition for attendance should be the same for all pupils, but we know some of them, some pupils need additional help and support to meet those expectations, and so you should think about in that how you meet all of your usual obligations under the Equalities Act. That policy should be published on the school's website and easily accessible. Many people have already got them on their websites, but it's very difficult to find for parents and for others. I know from bitter experience when I'm coming in to visit a school and searching for it through drop-down menus, etc. So have it nice and visible, clearly filed away on that website so that people know where to find it. And it should be sent to all parents who are joining the school, and the guidance makes clear that it should also be resent to parents at the beginning of each new school year, whether that's through your newsletter or whatever, so that they're constantly reminded of the processes that are in place. The fifth bullet there about is making sure that people, as I say, are familiar with its contents, not just pupils and parents, and regularly bring it to their attention, but making sure all staff, and Jayne will say more about this, are not only aware of the rules, but what their part is and how attendance is everyone's business. In developing it, there's an expectation in the guidance that you seek the views of pupils and parents, and that goes for a period of time if you're refreshing it as well. And then obviously at the bottom there, it goes without saying, but because the barriers to attendance and the drivers of absence change so quickly and evolve so quickly with situations, it should be regularly reviewed. It's not a job to do now and then put on your website and forget about it. It's a living, breathing document. Next slide, please. What that means in terms of what goes into the policy then is obviously in rules that I mentioned, it should set out what the policies are around attendance and punctuality for pupils. It should include the information on start and close of the school day, and alongside that when registers will close, and you will notice in the guidance that that should be no longer than 30 minutes after the beginning of the session or the length of time of the form period or the first lesson in which it's taken. It should include details on requesting leaves of absence and the processes for that, and also the processes that you want parents to follow in terms of updating and letting the school know of any unexpected or the reasons for any unexpected absences. They should also include the name and contact details of school staff that pupils need to contact or parents need to contact about attendance, both on a day-to-day basis, which may be the form tutor, attendance officer, reception, etc., but also who they can go to for more detailed support on attendance, whether that's a head of year, a pastoral lead, a family officer if you've got that, or which member of staff it is if you haven't. Next slide, please. This should also include details of how you as a school, so aside from the parents' expectations, you as a school will manage attendance, so your processes for on a day-to-day basis, whether that's first day calling or what you do to follow up on unexplained absences. It should also include the details of how you're going about promoting attendance, and the guidance has got information there on sensitive and inclusive rewards and incentives as well. So if you are using them, detailing how they're used and how you're doing so in an inclusive way. And then, as I say, the sort of bridge between that section on rules and processes to the detail on how you as a school are improving attendance is it should include a bit of detail on how you are using your data and what your data shows in terms of how you focus your improvement efforts. Next slide, please. And then bridging over into what you are doing and on top of how you're using the data, setting out the details of what strategies you as a school are using, both for persistent absence, pupils missing 10% or more of school, and severe absence, those missing 50% or more of school. That should include things like how to access wider support services, when you will provide referrals to various things, the point at which you will formalise that support and sort of move it beyond the stage of just suggesting things to parents to getting your local authority point of contact involved and moving towards sort of parenting contract or an early help assessment. And following that, where the support hasn't worked or isn't appropriate, such as a term time holiday, the point at which you'll use fixed penalty notices for absence, or you'll seek some of the other parental responsibility measures, be that an education supervision order or ultimately prosecution from the local authority. And you may have seen coverage in the press recently of the move towards a national framework for the use of fixed penalty notices rather than local authority by local authority, and that's making its way through Parliament. But in the meantime, you continue to follow the rules set by your local authority, and you can find and ask for a copy of their fixed penalty notice code of conduct. And I think I'll finish there and hand over to Jayne, who's got much more exciting insights to give than me on the sort of rules in the guidance.
Thanks, Adam. No pressure there then, got better things to say. Let's hope that's true. Thanks to everybody, first of all, for joining us on a Thursday afternoon after school. I know your time's really pressured and precious. So I've got some slides to share with you to really add a bit more flesh to the bones of what Adam's just described. The first thing I want to say and emphasise really is that none of you or no school starts this journey of policy review with a blank page. You already have attendance policy and procedures that are guiding your work right now, and some great work is happening in schools. I'm going to talk about aligning what you already have against the new expectations, and that's the starting point for this process really. Adam galloped through those 7 new requirements around policy, which I want to pick up on each of those, but I also want to talk about the wider requirements mapped out in the guidance and really think about how schools work and how schools run and how useful this policy should be really. It's a great time to take stock, refresh what you have, and a relaunch as well. I know lots of you have been resetting and relaunching on the back of COVID, and there's certainly no harm, lots of good to be done in doing that. The next thing I want to say is the policy should act as a user manual for parents, staff and students. We could all write a policy with the requirements that Adam's just outlined and have it sit on a shelf or on the website, but it would be great to have a document, and lots of schools do, that does provide that user manual for everybody and is incredibly accessible. The slide you can see in front of you, you'll see underlined, emboldened, the emphasis of we, our and us messages throughout what I'm going to talk to you about. That is absolutely deliberate, and it reiterates the notion about partnership working with parents, and that's absolutely where the new guidance is coming from, and it's the essence of what I'm going to talk to you about now. For me, there are 3 core elements, and that's what I see in great schools that I get to visit. I'm lucky enough to visit lots of schools, and I want to cover those 3 elements that encapsulate the new guidance as I see it. The questions that you'll see there attached to each of those sections really act as a prompt as to what should be included within that section of the policy. I'm going to work through each of those 3 now to add a little bit more detail. Next slide would be great, please. Okay, so the expectations and daily routines. This section of the policy is the introduction to what good attendance is and why it's important. And again, emphasising the homeschool partnership from the introduction is absolutely critical. This is about letting the audience know that working together is going to support success. As Adam does, I get to read lots of attendance policies, which some of them make absolutely great reading. This section, though, is often really, really wordy. It's full of legal jargon and responsibilities, and it's written in a very, very formal way. So we really need to think about the way in which this is written. I've seen some excellent examples, particularly in primary schools, actually, of this section written well. You've really got to consider the reading ages and accessibility for parents and students. The new guidance asks us to do a number of things, and that's identify the key personnel. But here's the opportunity as well to emphasise the things that you hold dear as a school. It's about keeping children safe, healthy and successful in learning. That's the introduction to a policy that's that focuses on the fundamentals, really, what's important to parents and what's important to school. This is a section to identify those key people. Who is leading on attendance? We know that's part of the new requirements, but who are the go-to people? Name them. They might be class teachers, they might be phase leads in a primary school, they could be designated safeguarding leads or key pastoral staff. Having a name, having a go-to person, great for parents, great for students, that's all part of the user manual piece. The expectations to parents actually and students are really simple if we boil it down. I saw an absolutely brilliant, it's really simple, primary attendance policy the other day, and its expectations were this simple: attend school regularly, attend school punctually, and attend prepared for the day. It says everything it needs to say, and it had some provisos underneath around legal duties and responsibilities for parents, but it was crystal clear in terms of what was expected. So that section needs to be snappy, short and clear for parents. The daily routines are really how things run in the school, and you'll know as leaders of schools and those involved in attendance, this is the bit that really makes it work on the ground. And that routine that runs through the day is critical to secure excellent punctuality, but also excellent attendance. And that starts with meet and greet routine at the gate, breakfast club provision, preschool activities. There are some great initiatives happening in school right now to encourage children in earlier, and also financial support to make those things happen. Which areas are open to the students prior to school opening? For secondary schools, sometimes that's a challenge if children are travelling by bus, getting there early. Where can they go in school? Is that clear in the policy? Register open and close times need to be crystal clear so that parents know when children need to be there. Have they got time to do the walk? Are they catching the right bus? Form time is a hobby horse of mine, or form time or meet and greet time in primary. Mapping out how that's going to run for parents and students within the attendance policy is key. It's a key meet and greet time for form tutors and class teachers. Let them know that uniform check, planners and celebrations will be happening to talk about attendance and punctuality. It's a critical time to reinforce all these messages. The policy should also make clear the follow-up procedures that happen behind the scenes. So things like checking registers, following up on unexplained absences, first day calling and home visits, that should be in the policy. Parents and students need to know who does those, why they happen, and be bold here, emphasise that link between absence and safeguarding. It's critical, but it doesn't appear in nearly enough policies to emphasise to parents that your duty is about keeping children safe. Let them know in the policy as well that you'll be making contact with external agencies if that's appropriate, so social workers will know if children are not in. Let's not forget the promotion and celebration though. Be clear in the policy around how you are going to celebrate and how you will promote. Promotion has got to be happening all the time. We need to see it in assemblies, form times, newsletters out to parents, displays around the school, within form rooms and classrooms, you know, that daily or that weekly activity of moving children up the attendance ladder. I saw a group of year 11s doing it just the other day who are competing at the moment for their attendance around exam time, which is always tricky. Having trophies, certificates, but also using key events such as parents' evenings and transition meetings. Some great work has been happening to support transition into secondary in these few weeks, and particularly this half term, to brief parents on the attendance policy and students, and also rehearse daily routines, walk them through from gates to breakfast club and to form time and how that works for them, to have that new year refresh, which aligns with that new expectation of that annual update for parents and students. Next slide, please. Okay, I want to say a little bit about data and monitoring, and I know Adam's touched on this already. Data is critical, and what I'm going to say here is we all, the royal we all need to know about the data. That's the staff, the students and the parents. And we're really fortunate in schools now with MIS systems that keep parents absolutely up to date with live data around children's attendance and behaviour in many cases too. So consider the data capture and tracking points, starting with register checks, the absence messages home, the portal updates that update parents to let them know their child's in school or not, or what information they need to provide maybe to explain an absence that a child's had. On a weekly basis, what are the routines in terms of reporting to key staff, such as class teachers, form tutors, pastoral and phase leads? And how is that data reviewed and shared with parents? For children maybe who are on attendance plans, but equally for children who are not, who are doing well, making sure that communication of data is continuous is really, really important, because we all know as soon as absent hits, it carries a long tail and it takes a long time to shake off. So keeping them in the know all the time is critical. In terms of the data, outlining the thresholds for parents is really clear. And when I talk about thresholds, I make reference to an escalation of procedures, which I'm going to show you in a minute or two. And it's thinking about those tiers which trigger key points of support for parents and students to address absence. Outline those threshold and trigger points and be clear about which member of staff is leading each phase. What happens at each stage in terms of support, and what might trigger the next phase, or if attendance improves, what happens next. Within the data section, within the policy, introduce some of that key terminology that Adam's talked about just now. So talk about your school or academy targets, talk about persistent absence and what it means to be a persistent absentee, and severely absent, and emphasise the safeguarding aspects around that, but also the impacts potentially on achievement and attainment. Reporting to parents is key. I've mentioned it earlier on, and keeping them up to speed through daily updates and regular reporting, and issuing attendance and absence reporting with academic reporting is absolutely essential. Some schools do that really well. They have really neat reports alongside the academic to show where children are up to, and the issue of letters on a regular cycle to indicate where students are on the attendance ladder or expectations or performance against expectations or targets. In terms of ensuring that the work's effective, reiterate the partnership message here. We, the royal we, all need to gather around the data and plan for action. Make this clear in the policy. So be clear, if absence is an issue, you'll meet with families and you'll monitor the data together. You'll listen to them and work with them to get the support right and ask them how it's going. You'll review the plans together with feedback from families when looking at the data to see, have barriers been overcome? Are there still barriers in the way? Are there new barriers? And assess the distance travelled to inform the next steps within that plan. Next slide, please. Okay. The escalation of procedures for me is an essential component of the policy, and it's a system that supports the attendance continuum. It's got 4 key components for me: the clarity on sequence, the who, what and when, specific timings of who's going to do what when, and what that support will look like. Roles and responsibilities, what's going to happen if attendance gets worse, but equally what will happen if attendance gets better. The tailored support, so the responses from pastoral staff, what's going to happen, what will the plans look like, and it's going to look different for every child based on the barriers and challenges they face. Formalising the support, it's a new piece of terminology that it sits in the new guidance. It's about being accessible and easy to understand. Parents know what the bottom line is if things get worse in terms of attendance, but equally what gets better. Next slide, please. I've included here 2 little extracts from, and I've obscured them a bit. They're a bit of a hybrid, but they offer just a couple of examples from schools. What these visuals do is offer, for me, the policy on a page. It shows on the left-hand side, it's really comprehensive, that one. It maps out the expectations using a RAG system, so the visual's really clear. We know where we want children to be, we can see it's green, and we can see how that slides down the right. It translates it into number of days missed, which is often easier for parents to grasp rather than percentages. Percentages often skew people's perceptions of how good or bad attendance is. The other thing it identifies is who owns each stage of that escalation of procedures. So who's taking charge, who's looking at the data, and who's organising the support around those children and families. And on the right hand side, it talks about some of the things that are going to be done to address absence or attendance within each of those layers, if you like, of the escalation procedures. Effectively, this is a policy on a page. This could be the appendix that parents really get to know well in terms of where do they expect my child to be, what's going to happen if they're not, and what will happen if they're doing well. On the right hand side, that graphic is something that focuses on the impact of attendance, and this was issued alongside the policy to parents to let them know about the impact of days missed in terms of achievement. You can see these are two examples. Many schools intervene earlier than the graphic shown, and many schools intervene with different types of support based on their locality and the cohort they serve. Next slide, please. Roles and responsibilities. Whole school policy, which is absolutely where we should be aiming, makes it really clear that everyone's got a contribution to make to support children to turn up every day, be on time and be prepared. And whole school means everybody. So that's from duty at the gate. I've seen in primary schools, caretakers running the most effective duty gates that I've seen. The receptionist often is a key person in maybe managing or receiving children as they come late and offering that motivational talk, but equally, you know, offering the stern stare when it's not quite at the right time. People at the gate need to be equipped in scanning, spotting, welcoming students. Gate duty, we know, improves punctuality, unpacks baggage and motivates children to get in. So having that right's key. The culture and systems must make children feel safe, welcome and supported. And actually, the culture must make parents equally feel safe, welcome and supported in order to have this partnership working. The students are going to need go-to adults who they can trust and talk to about absence and the barriers they might be facing. And the systems must promote the culture and support children to attend well. That's everybody doing the rah-rah, doing the celebration, doing the support. In terms of prevention, there's got to be investment in preventative work with every child. That might be for some children who attend well, continually sharing the message about the importance of attendance, reiterating routines for new children or those who are struggling, and certainly celebrating the achievements and progress with attendance for every child in the school. Procedures to respond to need to be enacted in the early stages. We know that. Getting in early will help stop that poor attendance routine progressing further, and progressing through stages which are clear, monitored, and the support intensifies as absence becomes a greater problem. And the focus is support. It's not just about penalty, which historically has been the case in some schools, in some communities. Consistent implementation. This is about every day, every form time, assemblies, every late gate. There will be a day when children are looking for you at the gate because they need to tell you why they can't get in or why they're late. There'll be children who really need that praise text because it's the first week they've ever had 100% attendance, and everyone in their house is, you know, put in 100% effort to get them there too. It's been tense, it's been difficult. They need that text to have that. They need to have trust and rely on the system to be consistent and deliver those messages continually. Next slide, please. Okay, let's talk quickly about tailored support. Tailored support needs regular analysis of the data. Everyone has to be furnished with the data. I've talked about parents, staff and students knowing what the data is around their attendance. If you've got a parent app for them to access that, they need to be signed up. If they're not signed up, get someone out, get them in, show them how to be signed up to that. Students in form time are form teachers or class teachers sharing that data in displays in form time, using a ladder system, sharing at the end of the week, doing that celebration or the competitive discussion around the data between forms and classes. Every layer of the pastoral system or hierarchy needs to have those reports. They also need to know how to analyse it. Staff will need training on how to analyse the data effectively, to spot trends, look at trigger points, and understand their position and their role within it. Within the policy, let the readers know how staff will engage with children and families to explore the issue. Ofsted put out a cracking report, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, in 2022. And the thing that resonated most with me with that was the listen, understand, empathise and support, but do not tolerate. But be really clear in your policy about how you'll listen to parents, that it's a two-way dialogue through telephone calls, home visits, meetings, and data discussions around plans and reviews for children. The right people, expertise and relationships is key in all of this. Identify people within that escalation of procedures, that policy on a page, and let them know about their roles in school and the expertise they have. You might also need to reference other specialists within the staff, such as the SENCO, mental health first aiders, or other senior staff. Equally, external partners all need reference within the policy. That might be the Ed Psych, youth offending, the police, social care, and the early help team, who are integral to lots of the delivery of support to families around absence and support in the home. Explain that the student's going to have an individual plan which commits to support for their barriers and challenges, and outlines the commitment that we, the royal we, parents, student and staff, are going to make that plan work and to make attendance a priority. And refer to the monitoring systems around the data too, around plan implementation and the impact of that duration of monitoring, and what's going to happen if things go well and what will happen if it doesn't. Next slide, please. Okay, formalising support. There is a shift in emphasis here. The focus is support. Previously, I've read, and currently still reading in lots of policies, the word sanction is often used frequently in this part of the policy, which is about formalising support. The shift in the guidance is real and it's clear, and it's about listening to families and putting the right support into place. Outline who you're going to be working with in this section of the policy, explain those referral processes, and explain that support is intensifying and being formalised in order to get those attendance routines in place, support the family, remove barriers and get that child into school. This part of the support should sit within that graphic that I've just talked about, that escalation of procedures. Make reference to the types of support and partnership working, such as parenting contracts and ESOs. Let them know what those are and that they are real support, and it's about parental responsibility, getting it right to get the children in. Be clear again about absence and safeguarding and the engagement of social care where that's appropriate. You might want to cover unauthorised leave in this part of the policy, although some people like to have that up early in the policy, front and centre, but be clear about your stance on unauthorised leave. And as I always say to lots of schools, don't use the H word. Any leave during school time should be exceptional. Okay, next slide, please. This is the last slide for me, but critical, I feel. The dissemination of and implementation of policy that's the heavy lifting all day long. So for dissemination, focus on the core elements to message consistently and repeatedly. Focus on school target, safety, access, and align it with the school values. Get it in that introduction piece and be prepared to share that over and over again. Newsletters, events, assemblies, the lot. Aim to establish an ongoing commentary with all stakeholders through the website, hard copies, texts, letters, postcards, and refer back to that policy piece at all times to remind and re-engage. Over communication is the key. If the students can sit in assembly and tell you what you're going to say before you say it, you know, we've almost cracked it. And when students first join the school, prioritise this message and make it really clear to parents. When the students first join you, rehearse the daily routines, have that registration piece absolutely right. Rehearse, you know, greeting at the gate, preschool activity, form time, have that right with children. Accessibility is key in terms of dissemination of the policy. Make it visual, Don't rely on complex stats on impact. Really break it down for parents and students. What will happen if my child does not attend? That's what they need to know. And what will happen if my child attends well? Get it up around school, in every classroom, in assembly and in reception where those visitors are going to land. Final say on implementation before we move over to questions. A policy is one thing, a whole school policy that has lived is absolutely another. Implementation is everything. People, and when I say people, I'm talking about staff, students and parents, need to see it working. Students need to see what expectations are, and they need to know how to meet them and what happens if they do and what happens if they don't. So they need to see that every day consistently. Staff also need to see it happening to know how to do it themselves. Staff will need to be trained about their responsibilities, and those who struggle with it will need ongoing support to meet those expectations. So things like completion of registers, never underestimate how much time you need to spend training staff to do that. How do I run form time? How do I meet and greet at the gate? You know, brand new staff to the profession will need to be taught how to form relationships with children. I was working with a trust just the other week who put together a top 10 of forming a relationship instantly at the gate. You know, smile at children, get to know them, offer compliments, ask if they're okay if they're looking a bit down in the dumps. Train staff how to do that, how you'd want it done yourself. Get out there and check that it's happening through monitoring. Visit the gate. Are they smiling at the children? Do they know how to screen children to see if, you know, if their mood is low, if they look well, or do they look unkempt? Does something not feel quite right? Are staff moving up children up the ladder in form time? Are they doing it consistently? Are they doing the rah-rah with children at the end of the week to celebrate achievements and set targets for the next? Walk the corridors. Are children out of lesson? Are they late to lesson? Dip sample those attendance plans. What's the quality of plans? Are they working? Are they making a difference? And let everyone know how it's going. Your monitoring is critical. Let everyone know what you found. Share the data with staff. Celebrate the highs. So if punctuality goes through the roof, celebrate that and identify what's made the difference and let staff know so we can do more of it. Equally, work through the lows. Tighten up practice if, you know, a particular day of the week or a particular year group are not getting punctuality right or late to lesson is an issue. Construct the action plan, front load it with staff, get them out there and solve it before it becomes a bigger issue, and give feedback on performance to let staff know that, you know, you recognise how well they're doing, you recognise the efforts they're putting in. So get out there and do that feedback and share that data with the key people in school. Okay, I think that's it from me.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jane. That has been a really helpful run through of key pointers for schools and trusts to be considering and everyone on the call to be considering as they look into refreshing their policies. I think I'm going to start with a question which has come in. It's probably the most frequent question, and I'll put it to Adam, which is about whether we're going to be publishing model attendance policies for schools and trusts to be using. So Adam, do you want to take that one to start with?
Thanks, Will. Yeah, and it's a question I've been hearing around the country. The short answer is no. The slightly longer, more complicated answer is that the headings that are provided in the guidance, as I said in paragraph 72, give you that structure. So that's as much of a model policy as we could really give you, because all the areas to cover you can set out directly from paragraph 72. And then, as you've heard from Jane, it has to be a living, breathing thing. So it's not meaningful for us to share you a neighbouring school's policy or a policy from another school in another part of the country. The processes and what goes into it will all be your own and will be representative of your school community. So the headings should be the same and consistent, and they're set out there in paragraph 72. Lift them across, but the content should very much be what individuals of schools. So that's why we're not publishing one.
Thanks, Adam. I'll just stay on that kind of subject of specific kind of questions about elements of the guidance. We had another question about whether there is an expectation about how frequently schools ought to be reviewing their attendance policy and what the cycle of that ought to look like.
Yeah.
Have you got some thoughts on that?
again, Jayne's touched on this perhaps better than I can in that phrase. It's a living thing. So you know, we've talked a lot this afternoon about continuous improvement and tweaking and monitoring and retweaking based on how it's working. So that really gives the answer to that. It isn't sensible to say I'm going to review this in 6 weeks' time and then at the end of the next half term, or I'm going to review it at Easter. It's reviewed in line with what you're learning. So if something's working really well, strengthen that bit, keep that bit, build on that bit. If something isn't working so well, it's about what can we do that's different, or if we've got a new problem that's come up. You know, we couldn't have prepared at the beginning of a few previous school years for what then happened. So it isn't sensible to have formal review periods. It's much better to adapt and go and build on it as you go.
Excellent. And just to round off this set of kind of operational questions in particular, we've had a question here saying that a school is going to be looking to refresh its policy at the beginning of next academic year, but will need to go through a process of ratifying that through the governing body.
Yeah.
Is that all okay in the context of the guidance being applied from September?
Yeah, I mean, it would be ideal if it could be done before, and then you start in the new school year fresh. And if you can do that, please do that. Everybody's got the beginning of term to start and prepare. So if there is no alternative, then yes. But if at least we try and be as clear as you can from the beginning of the year on what the expectations will be, because again, as Jayne's much more eloquently pointed out than me, it's all about habit and routine and building that into the way people do. So start with that new moment at the beginning of the year and build on that as you go, if you can.
Excellent. Thank you, Adam. Jayne, I'm going to come to you now with a couple of questions. One you already alluded to briefly earlier in the session, which is about how we communicate attendance policy to parents and families in particular. And you talked about the escalation of procedures and sharing that, but we've had some kind of general questions about whether it's good practice to share a summary document, the whole thing, or if you've got kind of further things to say on that issue specifically.
Thanks, Will. It's a really useful question, actually. The policy itself needs to be accessible, and we want to write it in a way that is accessible. So having it on the website and having copies available for parents want to see it. The policy on the page piece, I think, can be really powerful, and that's why I wanted to share potentially what it could look like with you, because that section of the policy is almost the summary of expectations, who does what, and what happens if things worsen or improve. And having that as a reference piece in the policy, it outlines it on a page for parents. It's very accessible. It also gives you a document to refer back to if parents fall into those stages. So if they come to a meeting with you, you can reference the point at which they're at and the point at which you're trying to get them to with support to move them on. So it becomes a very visual working piece of information. So in short, offer the policy in full, but really focus on those core components when you meet with and talk to parents so they understand the procedures. And the same with children as well. They need to understand the escalation of procedures too, so they know where they need to be and what's going to happen to support them to get there. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's really helpful, actually, Jayne. Thank you. And there's another question here, which is about whether there are any special implications here for, or any particular implications rather, for special schools in particular, and whether there are any kind of tweaks to anything that you've suggested in the presentation that you think people in special schools ought to be taking account of. Okay,
in terms of the support, that the nature of the cohort will always drive what the intervention is going to look like for children, and every family and every child presents a different set of circumstances for us to manage. In terms of the structure of the policy, absolutely not. And in terms of the structure of the core components, no, you need those daily procedures, you need the escalation, and you need that support and dissemination piece. All of that's important. The escalation of procedures piece, which is about who does what and what might the support look like, may look very different in a special school. Particularly for children who are potentially being transported in each day, we know some of the challenges that brings, and support around getting children in on time or supporting them to get onto the taxi, that might be a very unique piece that you put around the family to support that child to get in. So the nature of the support, yes. In terms of escalation, no. It should look the same in terms of its core components.
Excellent, thank you, Jane. There's one question here that I'd quite like us to cover as well, which is about striking the balance between rewarding excellent attendance but not penalising those who can't be in school for various reasons. So I wonder if there's something you can say on that, Jane, and just kind of striking the appropriate balance and celebrating improvements in attendance as well as absolute attendance levels.
It's a great question, and I didn't say enough about this. We'll have children who are always 100%ers or close to 100%ers, and it's really easy to spot those and reward those, isn't it? However, the improvements that children make are, I'm going to say, equally important, but they're probably more important. It's those children who make those improvements that get them on that positive trajectory, and we have to reward that. So looking at year-to-date data is, you know, a really simplistic way of rewarding attendance half term by half term. However, we have to recognise improvements, which might be looking at week by week how children do. For children on plans where we put together an attendance plan around a child and a family to support them to improve it, the tiny steps that they take, we absolutely have to reward and motivate children in order to allow them and support them to make the next step, and they have to be recognised. As I said before, attendance has a long tail. As soon as you start to have absence, it takes an awful long time to shake it off. So we have to focus on the here and now and reward for the improvements that children make.
Excellent. Thanks, Jane. There are quite a few questions here about COVID and taking account of COVID in the attendance policy. I mean, I think, Jane, this would be helpful actually, given your speaking with schools and trusts and local authorities on a regular basis, and we know that COVID hasn't gone away. If you could just give some sort of high-level reflections on that issue in particular.
Yeah, lots of schools already have done some kind of reset around attendance, and I know I made reference to this earlier on. I think the guidance allows us to have a more formalised reset now through refresh of the policy. COVID has been, you know, catastrophic in terms of the impact on children and families for that matter, and some of those added pressures in family households now around affording things, you know, price of living, cost of things is also adding significant pressure. And so we move into the winter, that will impact further, and we need to think about the support around families. In terms of COVID and the policy, the opportunity for refresh is real, and I think it's the communication now with parents, which will sit in policy document, but it's far more about how that's disseminated to parents. COVID has happened and is still happening to some extent. The impact on gaps in children's learning is significant. The school's doing all it can to catch up, and the reset around attendance is making sure everybody works on having children in school, which is why our escalation of procedures is being reset and refreshed and is kick-starting again. Some schools that's already happened, but focusing on that kickstart is key to make sure that they are clear of expectations for September and the expectation that that COVID gap, we have to catch up on that and we have to have children in school. So it's about understanding, putting measures and support in place, but the expectation that children will be in.
Thank you, Jane. Adam, I've got one here for you, if that's okay, which is about local authority and the new set of expectations on local authorities in the guidance. Yeah. And there's a question here about how we're going to ensure that local authorities actually put in place the support that's set out in that guidance, and how we're going to be monitoring and ensuring that happens so that schools are able to fulfil their obligations too.
Yes, before I answer that, Will, could I just correct what I said before about paragraph 72 confusing people in the chat? It's paragraph 17 on page 11 of the new guidance. All schools already have a copy. Lots of people asking about that. It's been sent to every school by email. But if you've lost it or you can't access that, we'll pop a link into the chat for you now so that you can get that. But yes, paragraph 17 on page 11. apologies about that. In terms of the LA question, it will take time for local authorities to get to the point where they can provide all of this stuff. As you know, depending on where you are in the country there's a huge variation in the quality and breadth of the service that the LA is able to offer because of historic reasons. In terms of from September, what they're expected to do is very clear. It's set out in guidance. It will take them time to transition, particularly away from models where they're requiring you to buy in or agree a service level agreement, and so you might not see some of that happening until September 2023. But by that point, the department's very clear on what the expectations will be, and local authorities will be held to account through the usual channels for those things, in the same way that schools will be held to account for the bits in the first section of the guidance. But what I think is the big message, and I said a little bit on this in the first webinar we did on this, is it's all well and good having guidance, but it all relies on good relationships, good joint working, a shared ethos of working together on this stuff. That's why the document's called that. So you shouldn't see it as this is what school does and this is what the local authority does. You should see it as these are our expectations in school, this is what we can offer and help the local authority with, and this is where we need their work. And throughout all of this work, sitting down, using your point of contact that you will get in the LA's attendance team, working together as much as you possibly can on all of those things, will start to break some of that down. And if there are bits that you want to see that are different in your local authority service, you're going to have the chance to say that to them. You're going to have a point of contact there, and I'm sure they'll be asking how you want to build and work the service transformations that they're doing. So there's time to shape that, but please do see it as that shared ethos and how you can help one another rather than an us and them. And I've given the same message to them this afternoon.
Excellent, thank you, Adam. There is another question here, which is a relatively specific one. Actually, I'll put it to you, Jayne. Again, just in case you've got any tips or ideas for the poster of this question, which is about children with long-term medical conditions and how schools can best support those children, how they can escalate, how they can reward their attendance. I will also just quickly signpost, we ran 2 webinars with 2 special schools about 4 or 5 weeks ago, which can be found on the DfE website, and those special schools talk in particular about how they support those children to regularly attend school. So it'll be worth people on these calls looking at those the videos of those sessions if they haven't already done so for ideas. But Jayne, any kind of thoughts or reflections on that question?
Yeah, of course. From a policy point of view, the first thing is to have clear policy and procedures around how you work with local authorities to support children with long-term medical conditions as well. And there's a lot of partnership working to be done there to support those children, access support, tuition and other services in order to support effectively. From schools' point of view, and maintaining engagement with those children is absolutely key, even when they are deemed too ill to be in school by clinicians. And that's done in some really great ways in different schools. I've been in a group of schools actually this week, and going into another of their schools tomorrow, where they're doing some fantastic work around children who have struggled significantly to get into school during COVID and also make the return post-COVID. They've supported that in a number of ways. They've done that through online tuition. They've done it through home visits to go out and broker support and also build confidence in families that it's safe to come back to school. And when children who've got chronic medical conditions come into school, what it's going to look like for them. Is it safe? What will the environment be like? What kind of support will they have? How will you liaise with clinicians? And doing that intensive work with families has built confidence and given assurances to enable children to come into school steadily and slowly. And some of the dramatic improvements we were talking about this week are children who haven't attended schools for X number of years because of medical conditions, who are now back in a gradual sense. And promoting and supporting and rewarding and celebrating that as part of their journey has been key in order to keep success. I spoke to one student just the other day whose parent brings him into school and still sits on the car park to wait for him to come out every single day, and she's done that for a very long time. And next week he's about to move on to a member of staff bringing him in and his mum staying at home, which is a small step but a dramatic step for him. But that collaborative working has enabled those children to get back into school.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you, Adam. I think that probably brings us to a conclusion of the question and answer session. Apologies to anybody who asked questions that we weren't able to get round to. We've had lots and lots of questions, both about where and what the new guidance is. You'll be able to find links already in the sidebar that you should be able to see to access the new guidance. There have also been lots of questions again about whether we'll be sharing the slides. So to reiterate, we will be sharing the slides, and a recording of this session will be available both on the DFE YouTube channel. The link to that ought to be in the sidebar for you as well. And we'll be putting it on the dedicated best practice sharing page, where you can find all of the previous webinars that we've run with a range of primary, secondary, AP and special schools. So thanks again to Jane and Adam, and thanks to everyone for joining.